We are live. Hello and welcome to the Undisputed MMA show presented by the FTN Network. My name is Jonah Shiffman. I'm joined as I am every week by John Kelly. We're going to be talking about UFC Vegas 49 going down this weekend. At the Apex, we got a main event between Islam Makhachev, who some consider to be the best lightweight in the world, and he takes on short notice replacement Bobby King Green, who's filling in for Beneil Dariush on about 10 days notice here. John, we've got a fight card with 11 fights now on tap for this weekend. We just lost a fight like 20 minutes before we went live, doing the show a little earlier than normal this week. So hopefully it's Wednesday afternoon right now. Hopefully not too many fights fall off the card prior to this show getting out. But right now we've got 11 fights following Hannah Goldie pulling out of the card. But 11 fights to talk about, John. Looks like a decent card from a DFS perspective. Haven't found a ton of betting spots that I think hold value so far, and not necessarily the best week in terms of name recognition, but hopefully we'll be able to find the people some plays this weekend. How are you doing, my friend, before we get into the fights?
Yeah, I was doing good, and now we lost Hannah Goldie and Jinyu Frey. So I'm honestly like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this tonight. I'm really going through it. So yeah, I guess the rest of these 11 fights will have to do. We lost the best fight on the card, but we'll power through it. I do actually think this is a pretty decent spot. I know it's low level. I think it's a decent card for props this week. It's kind of the reverse of last week, because last week we had, I think, some pretty clear favorites. It seemed like more of a parlay type of week, a lay it with the favorites type of week. And this week, I think there's a few live underdogs. I think there's a few big prop spots that I like. And yeah, excited to hear your take on it. And I'm sure we'll go over the Draftkings strategy as well with only an 11 fight slate.
Yeah, of course. Everyone knows the strategy gets a little bit different when we have 11 fights as opposed to 12 or even 15. The slate strategy as a whole, independent of the player pool, kind of changes slate to slate. So that's something that we'll be sure to touch on kind of throughout the show. But without much further ado, John, let's get started here in a fight between two Dana White Contender Series alum, a fight I know you're excited about. We got Carlos Hernandez, currently a -140 favorite in our first fight of the night. He's $8,200 on DraftKings. He takes on Victor Altamirano, who comes back +120, 8K flat. Both these guys have actually had pretty successful careers leading up to Contender Series. Hernandez won on Contender Series, showed some solid wrestling in that fight, some solid scrambling ability. This is a guy who lost his professional debut, has since won 7 fights in a row, so enters the fight on a pretty long win streak. And then on the other side, we look at Altamirano. This is a guy who he's 10-1 as a professional, has only lost comes to a UFC veteran, Jared Brooks. He's someone who's had a lot of success outside the octagon, each of them making their debut this weekend. And John, I saw a big bet for you in the bet tracker. I mentioned it to you. We don't talk much during the week prior to our show. I mean, we talk a little bit, but try not to, give too many takes, so we have like an organic conversation on stream. So 2 things. First of all, when I texted you like an hour ago about the Goldie versus Fry fight being canceled, and you were like, oh, bummer. I honestly didn't even know if you were sarcastic, so I had to go check the bet tracker to see if you actually had a play on the fight, because I had no idea. But when I was in the tracker, I saw you had a big bet on this fight, specifically the first fight of the night. So curious to hear your take here on first fight of the night, John.
Yeah, I do actually have a pretty strong take here. Victor Altamirano and Hernandez. I tape both these guys on Contender Series. I do feel pretty good about this read. Altamirano's a guy who, when I taped him originally, I'm like, he's kind of like that Brandon Royval light in a sense, in that he's going to move forward. He's going to bring a high pace. He's going to throw a ton of volume. He's going to do some unorthodox type things involving grappling, like he'll pull guillotine, he'll go for some crazy leg locks when it doesn't really make a ton of sense. He has that same style where he's out there to bring a dogfight. And while that's exciting, it's just not the best game plan, especially for a guy like him who I don't think has as much actual raw talent as a guy like Brandon Royval. I think his defense is a pretty big red flag. He fights with his hands down, throws a lot of naked leg kicks, but he just eats a ton of clean punches to the face. And I think that's a real problem here, where he might be able to pressure and he's going to be throwing a ton of leg kicks, but I think he's going to eat the big clear shot from Hernandez. Hernandez comes from a kickboxing background. He's a former, I believe, the Pan Am 2012 kickboxing silver medalist. So he does have a pretty solid striking background, better footwork, I think, than Altamirano. Probably beats him to the punch in terms of speed. I do think he has a little bit of power as well. He's not like a super power puncher, but I mean, he is a talented striker. he fought a much better guy on Contender Series than Daniel Perez, and Perez looked really good early, wrestled him early, much more explosive, landed some clean shots, but Hernandez just withstood the early storm. And then in round 2, when he was able to wind up in top position, that control was for real. Daniel Perez, I rate his grappling a lot better than Altamirano. Altamirano's a guy that's willing to play off his back quite a bit for extended periods. And Perez is more like explosive, like working back to his feet. He couldn't get up when Hernandez was on top of him. Hernandez doesn't have like a high level wrestling background, but he did wrestle in high school. He's just really well rounded, honestly. And I just think this is a spot where he's going to be landing the cleaner shots, the more impactful shots on the feet. And then when it comes to the grappling, like I think he could land takedowns here. And if he gets on top of Altamirano, I think Altamirano is going to spend a lot of time off his back. And that's what plagued him in that Contender Series fight. A lot of people actually thought he lost that fight against Carlos Candelario. I thought he lost the first 2 rounds, honestly. And I'm not just saying that. Like I had, he was in my D-Gen parlay for Contender Series. And that was one of the ones where I actually hit all 5 of the Contenders fights. So he saved it. So I'm not mad about the decision. But I thought he lost the first 2 rounds. Candelario was on short notice, ended up gassing out. And that's one thing I'll say about Altamirano is his cardio's good. He can go a hard 15. That's really what happened in that fight, that weaponized cardio where he just dominated not even really dominated, but clearly won the 3rd round just based on aggression and volume. And I just don't see that happening against Hernandez here, who, like I said, could spend a lot of time in top position. I think is going to land the bigger, cleaner shots, which I think are going to score more as opposed to just the spam leg kicks from the Altamirano side. So biggest bet of the card for me so far on Hernandez. I played him at the money line at -128 to win 2 units. So I feel pretty good about the read here. I like the Hernandez side. What about you?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's a great breakdown right there. Looks like you got ahead of the market move a little bit. I know when you made that play earlier in the week, you had mentioned in our Discord, the FTM Bets Discord, which is free to join. Anyone watching the show should come hang out. We mostly just talk about different lines, things we're looking at throughout the week, and then sweat out the fights together. But you had mentioned, John, you didn't think that -128 number that I think you got was going to stick around for long. Line has certainly been moving since you posted the play. Not necessarily that you triggered the line movement, although who knows, the John Kelly pull is pretty big these days. But but in terms of how I see the fight playing out, I think you actually did a really good job with the Altamirano comparison. You compared him to Brandon Royval. I kind of thought he looked a little bit like Ricky Tercios when I was taping this fight. Kind of the same sort of fighting style. He's super unorthodox guy, will kind of throw from all different sorts of angles. Certainly is liable to get taken down, but kind of works with those like he'll throw slaps, he'll throw anything he can off his back. He's like constantly throwing output. I do actually think his best tools are his durability, and then you mentioned his cardio. Won his round 3 on Contender Series in pretty convincing fashion, but I tend to fall on your side, John. I think Hernandez is just the more skilled fighter in terms of the stand-up and more specifically the wrestling. Like Altamirano concedes takedowns very frequently, and I think Hernandez, although he didn't land any takedowns of his own on Contender Series, he got to some dominant positions, found himself on the back of his opponent, who, like you mentioned, is a pretty solid grappler in his own right. So Hernandez got to his back once or twice, I think twice in both of the first 2 rounds in that fight. So I actually think Hernandez is a rightful favorite in this spot. I'm not sure I'll lay it at -140, but hearing your take certainly makes me a little bit more confident. I only have 1 bet so far on the card, and it's actually on the main event between Makhachev and Green. But maybe I'll do the old sandwich here, and I'll bet on the first fight of the night and the last fight of the night, and we'll skip everything else in between. Although there might be some spots with props. We'll talk about the props kind of as we go through the card. Not all of them are out yet, widely available, and I know that's something that you obviously focus on, John. So we'll be sure to touch on those and kind of what numbers could possibly come out down the line this week that would make sense to play in the prop market. So let's move on to the second fight of the night here. We got Ramis Brahima coming back after just a really small layoff after losing to Court McGee. He's a -400 favorite here, which sounds crazy to say. $9.3 thousand on DraftKings. And part of the reason he's a -400 favorite is he takes on Michael Gilmore, who's 0-1 in the UFC. Gilmore lost to Andre Petrovsky in the UFC on that the tough finale show. And he also lost a few times on the Ultimate Fighter show, where he actually filled in as a replacement for the show, wasn't originally cast to be there, was an injury replacement, but he finds himself a pretty big underdog this weekend, +300. He's just $6.9 thousand on DraftKings, and we don't need to spend a ton of time here with my breakdown of the fight. I think Ramis Brahima is a guy who struggled. We struggled to handicap him a little bit. His UFC debut comes into Max Griffin. This is a guy who on the regional scene is just super grappling heavy. Showed the ability to kind of take a shot and then get fights to the ground, get to dominant positions. Very aggressive grappler in terms of hunting submissions when in good position to do so. And even when he's not in good position to do so, like Brahima is just a very aggressive grappler, period. Concedes position sometimes for submission, but certainly a guy who's capable of grappling. And then the Max Griffin fight gets stuck in a kickboxing match, basically has his ear fall off in round 3, gets completely outstruck for the majority of the fight, then quickly submits Sasha Paletnikov, who's no longer in the UFC, in his second fight. So me and you, John, we were on Court McGee in his third fight, but there's definitely kind of the sense around Brahima where we don't know what to expect. We think a veteran like Court McGee is going to be able to outlast him in terms of the grappling. And Brahima really got outclassed in a way that I wasn't even expecting, and I had a bet on Court McGee. So he really struggled in that matchup. That said, Michael Gilmore just not UFC level. I mean, he has a decent leg kick. He throws an overhand once or twice around, but his wrestling and grappling is really poor to the level of, like, in men's MMA in 2022, you see some bad grapplers in the UFC, but you don't see guys who are like complete liabilities on the mat anymore. And I feel like as MMA progresses as a whole, we'll see less guys where they're like so, void of one skill that it makes up part of the mixed martial arts. But man, I don't want to shit on the guy too much, but Michael Gilmore just clearly in the UFC, because I think he was filled in on Contender Series. Dana was appreciative of that. His skill level, man, he doesn't belong at this level. And I think Brahima gets it done this weekend. Am I laying minus 400 on a guy who we've already seen, kind of be gun shy of his best tool and get in an extended kickboxing fight? No, I'm not laying minus 400, but I do think the price tag is right. I was hoping we'd get like a minus 200 on Brahima because he was 1-2 in the UFC and has kind of looked so poor. But looks like we're not going to be able to get a number here. But I think Brahima, big favorite, makes a lot of sense. Maybe some underdog or fantasy props come out here in terms of how many strikes Gilmore lands. I'll take the under on all of it. Like, I think Brahima shoots takedowns. I think he wins this fight pretty dominant fashion. I think submission is like plus 100. Round 1 is like plus 150. So not a ton of value to be had in the prop market, but I think for good reason. I think Brahima probably gets him out of there early this weekend. But John, any opinion from you here? You think Gilmore's live as an underdog, or probably pretty sweat free minus 400 cash for Brahima?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's sweat free. Like, I'm certainly not parlaying Brahima or anything like that.
Right.
But historically, he's either going to take his opponent down and submit him, or he's really going to struggle. His striking is not really there. I know he's training out of Fortis, right? I think he trains out of Fortis. So, I mean, it's a solid camp. The striking, you would think, is improving. But it's really, to me, it's like he's going to take care of these low-level guys by taking them down. He's solid enough grappler to where he can get them out of there. And Michael Gilmore, to me, falls in that category. So I'm not going to overthink it. I think Brahima, like you said, gets the takedowns and probably finds an early sub. Now, you mentioned the sub line. Most of it is like plus 100, plus 110. I think that's a little bit too short for my liking, just because there's so much that can happen. Maybe he gets a ground and pound finish, something like that. Maybe it goes to decision. Who knows? But I will be waiting for FanDuel to drop the first round submission prop. Brahima, I believe all of his wins have come by submission. The majority of those were inside the first round. I think all but one, if I remember correctly. So I'll be waiting to see what the number is on first round sub. If we see like a plus 350, plus 380, somewhere like that, I think that might be worth at least half a unit. But outside of that, I'm not going to have any action here. I don't think Gilmore belongs here. And I think Brahima will probably prove that with the early submission on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if DraftKings released their prop pretty early this week, I should say. And I don't think we're going to get that plus 350 number. I wish we would, but looks like Brahima to win by sub is just plus 100 on DK, and then exact method of victory, whatever. I can look it up and I'll get back to you, but I think it's not better than plus 200, just kind of based on how the round 1 market sets up and the submission market. So I would be surprised if we get better than plus 200, but like we mentioned to start the show, we're taping it earlier than normal. It's Wednesday afternoon. FanDuel is always liable to put out some of those props that don't make a ton of sense compared to the market. So if you do see plus 300, plus 350 on a Brahima submission in round 1 prop against Gilmore, probably worth a shot before the line moves back to the plus 200 range, where I think it'll settle at eventually come Saturday night. Let's move on, John, to the third fight of the night. This is a matchup between Jonathan Martinez and Alejandro Perez. We got Martinez currently as a minus 240 favorite, one of the bigger favorites on this card, and not the best card in the world in terms of, the recognition. And I honestly don't think it'll be great in terms of pure entertainment, just being completely candid, but there are a lot of closely lined fights. This is not necessarily one of them. Martinez is minus 240. Perez comes back plus 195. And I've never been a Jonathan Martinez guy myself, John. I think you and pretty much anyone who's consumed our content knows that. I think he's a little bit fragile. We've seen him hurt in many fights before. He never really offensively wrestles. He's very content to just sit back and have kind of a slow-paced kickboxing match. But I actually do think this is a decent spot for Jonathan Martinez. You look at a guy in Alejandro Perez who been in the UFC a long time. He's only 32 years old, but one of those guys who I think has a good amount of wins in the promotion, but he's just kind of well-rounded, but not necessarily any skill that's great. You know, his wrestling is decent. We saw his grappling be pretty impressive actually against Johnny Eduardo in a submission victory his last time out. With Alejandro Perez, I have this thing where it's like he just goes out there and throws no volume. He stands in front of his opponent, doesn't throw a ton. He doesn't shoot a ton of takedowns either. We've seen him have some success when he does, but it's one of those things where you don't know fight to fight whether he's even going to shoot takedowns or not. And Jonathan Martinez is a decent takedown defense. I think this plays out like most Jonathan Martinez fights with like a rangy kickboxing decision where Martinez will go kick the leg and then go up high once or twice. I will say that Perez struggled a little bit to defend the leg kicks of Johnny Eduardo his last time out. Certainly think that'll be a weapon Martinez uses. In terms of the betting odds, minus 240 might be a little bit wide for a guy Martinez who it's hard for him to win in like blowout fashion. His fights seem to always be a little bit close. He doesn't have a ton of finishing upside, but that said, like Perez, I think he needs to get the fight to the ground. We don't even know if he's going to try to do that. And I'm not even sure he'll have success if he were to try and wrestle. So I think Martinez minus 200, minus 250 is about accurate, but maybe a little wide. John, do you think the line is wide here at all, or no action for you on this fight? Because I can't imagine you're laying it with Jonathan Martinez at minus 250.
Yeah, I'm not laying it with Martinez, but I do agree with you. I do think he should be the favorite here. I think the pricing is about right. Martinez is just not a guy historically that I've backed. I've kind of looked to fade him a couple times. He's got solid striking. The volume is so. At times we start to see him put on a pace, but especially early on in the UFC, up until really his last fight, we just really haven't seen a ton of volume out of him. He does have some power, but he also is kind of chinny himself. Like he's been dropped, I think, once or twice. Obviously, the knockout by Davey Grant wasn't good. But the on the Perez side, it's kind of a lot of the same things, right? Like low volume, does have some power, but also pretty chinny. He's been knocked out as well. So this is one that I honestly is like low-key going to be a banger, I think, because both of them are going to bring it. I think both of them are a little bit susceptible to getting clipped. But I do think both of them are going to look to hurt the other fighter, and I don't think either of them is really going to look to wrestle or grapple here. So I do think we have a striking match. I do think somebody probably gets clipped here. So I actually have a little bit more interest in this fight than I think the field will in terms of DraftKings, because I think probably more people are expecting a decision here, but I actually think we see somebody get knocked out here. So not exactly sure who. I think Martinez should win this, but who knows? I might be a little bit higher on the underdog. We'll see come this weekend, but I am going to be targeting this fight on DraftKings, both sides.
Any interest in you on playing an under in this spot? The fight's favorite to go the distance. You get like plus 145 right now on the fight not to go the distance. I know FanDuel, which is your favorite book, hasn't necessarily put out a ton of odds for this fight, but if you were to get plus 140 on this fight to go the distance, or if people listening have that available to them right now, is that something that you might have some interest in hunting a finish this weekend in this fight?
Yeah, for sure. I think plus 140 fight doesn't go. That's fine for a unit. Like you said, I haven't played anything yet. I'm kind of waiting to see what FanDuel's going to do. I didn't look at their round props yet, but I think I might have a little bit more interest there. Maybe a fight doesn't start round 3 if you can get that at a bigger number. I'm assuming that might be like closer to plus 200. I'd probably prefer that, because I think if we do see a finish, it's probably inside the first 2 rounds.
Makes a lot of sense to me. Let's move on to the next fight of the night. We're just speeding through here. We got a fight that we talked about a few months ago. It was originally scheduled to go down, I think, at the end of November on a Thiago Santos card. Was canceled due to COVID. It got rescheduled almost 3-4 months later here in February. We got Terence McKinney against Fares Ziam in a fight that's projected to be pretty close, according to Vegas and the market at least. We got Ziam currently minus 120. He's $8.4 thousand on DraftKings. And then Terence McKinney, even money underdog here, $7.8 thousand on DK for McKinney. This is a fight, like I mentioned, we've already broke down before on the show. If you guys want to go back to that episode, I think it was UFC Vegas 43, if I remember correctly. Of course, we're going to break it down again. This is a matchup that I think a lot of people were excited about the first time around on a better card than we had this weekend. And now this fight's going down in 3 days. And I just feel like there hasn't been a ton of hype around it. Maybe that's because neither guy has fought in a while, but just to jog your memory, Terence McKinney 1-0 in the UFC. His win came over Matt Frevola, who just had an impressive win in his own right. And McKinney, I think he set the record in the weight class for the fastest KO, 7 seconds there. And then Fresh Ziam, started his UFC career 0-1, lost a decision to Don Madge, and has since gone 2-0. Looked pretty good, I think, against Jamie Malarkey, which is a win that has aged well since it happened almost 2 years ago at this point. Malarkey's put together some wins. So I think this is actually a pretty quality fight, one I'm looking forward to on the prelims. John, I'll let you break it down first here. I think the first time we discussed this fight, neither of us planned on having any action, but the markets are a little bit different, especially on the prop side. Maybe I'll let you get into that. But any interest here in the betting markets between ZM and McKinney?
Yeah, I definitely have interest. I haven't made a bet one way or the other yet. When we talked about this fight last, they were lined as a pick'em, and now obviously ZM a pretty small favorite here. But I do kind of like the McKinney side. I have some concerns about him moving forward, but I think at least the explosiveness, the aggressiveness early, along with the wrestling, that's really the way that you can kind of beat ZM. He comes from the high-level striking background. That's what he wants to do, is keep the fight at range where he is super technical. He's going to be able to, land that jab repeatedly against McKinney. And honestly, I think both guys have finishing upside here. Like, obviously, McKinney has the round 1 finishing upside and the wrestling upside, which is why I tend to lean towards him in terms of DraftKings, because I think that's just automatically gives him a higher ceiling. But I also wouldn't sleep on the ZM side of in terms of finishing upside, because if McKinney doesn't have that early success, I think ZM probably starts to really take over here. So it's kind of a fight where I view it as McKinney's super live to win the fight in round 1. But outside of round 1, it starts to heavily lean towards ZM. So this could be a possible live betting spot if McKinney looks really sharp early and starts to fade a little bit. He's a guy that historically has not done well outside of the first round. If he's ever pushed past the first round, you mentioned it's only took him.
It's only been twice.
Yeah, it's only taken him 7 seconds to knock out Matt Frevola. So the cardio is definitely more of a question mark. I favor ZM the longer the fight goes. So it's like, I think McKinney can win in round 1. But outside of that, I think ZM probably gets a finish in round 2 or round 3. So I really just kind of need to decide how I'm going to play this one. I think targeting round props might be better, just because of the way I see this playing out, rather than just taking an under, just because you're going to get more of a bang for a buck. Maybe ZM round 2 props. I'm definitely going to see what that number is, and or round 2 KO as well. But yeah, this is going to be one where I target both sides pretty heavily on DraftKings. Lean towards McKinney because of that upside, but again, I'm definitely not sleeping on ZM. And I stress that because I feel like a lot of people are like, well, he's a decision-only guy, because we really haven't seen the finishes from him at the UFC. But like, he's a high-level striker. McKinney's cardio, if he fades, like I think he could get him out of there if he survives round 1.
Yeah, so I actually think it's most interesting that you brought up the totals market in this fight and the fight not going the distance, because that market has actually shifted a lot since the first time these two were scheduled to fight. The money line remains pretty similar. We see ZM now like minus 130 in some spots. It was closer to minus 110, minus 150 the first time around, minus 115, I should say, the first time around. But this time, the thing that's moved even more than the money line has, which has been a small adjustment, has been the under. This fight was like minus 250 to not finish, or to finish inside the distance. So minus 250 on there being a finish the first time it was booked. And this time, those odds are down to like minus 190. So it seems like a lot more people like the over in this spot. I thought the over or the goes to distance at plus 200 the first time around was a little bit appealing. And now it's way down to plus 150, plus 138 in some spots where I would just have no interest in playing an over. And like you mentioned, you kind of like an under, subjectively speaking, John. So just an interesting note there, how the market has changed, despite the fact that, we got close to market close. Like McKinney pulled out because I think his corner got COVID, and that was happening on Thursday or Friday of fight week. So it's interesting that the market in terms of the total is kind of totally reshaped here the second time around. But in terms of how the fight plays out, I agree with you. I think this might be a spot where the live entry on Zion, like you mentioned, makes sense, John. Or even last week, I know you played Jonathan Pierce to win in submission, or to win by submission in rounds 2 or 3 last week. FanDuel has been offering these like exact method and then a band of rounds. Maybe we see like a Zion to win by submission in rounds 2 or 3 pop. McKinney round 1 props are also probably good. Like Terence Mckinney, super explosive athlete, actually has a decent wrestling base. I feel like that's something that not a lot of people are giving him credit for. You go back and watch his regional scene fights. There's the times where, he's throwing these high kicks and he falls down in his own right, which I mentioned happens like every fight with this kid. He's not gun shy whatsoever, but he also does possess some wrestling issues. However, you mentioned, John, his cardio is a little bit untested. We've only seen him out of the first round twice in his career. I don't think he's going to be able to wrestle, put on a real pace on a guy for 2-3 rounds in this spot. So maybe he wrestles a little bit early, but honestly, that might just gas him out even more. So to me, with a guy like McKinney, he should just embrace the volatility, go out there, be the first round finisher. He is. We back him like that in the betting market. We play him in DFS. And then if he can't get the finish, I think Ziam is probably the better technical striker, especially once McKinney's pace slows down, because in the UFC, we see it time and time again. A guy could be a better, technical striker in Fres Ziam, but if McKinney throws 50 or 60 significant strikes in round one, he's still likely to win that round on the scorecards. But as time extends, I think Ziam will certainly have a striking advantage and probably be tougher to take down. I just wanted to mention the Jamie Malarkey fight one more time for Ziam. That was a fight where he was facing a pretty good wrestler, and hey, he got taken down 5 times, but only controlled for, I think, 6 or 7 minutes of that matchup. Pretty much won the fight on his get-ups and having the ability to get back to his feet and go where he had the advantage in the striking. So I actually think there's some encouraging signs for Ziam. If he ever got down to like a pick'em plus 100, minus 105, I would probably bet Fres Ziam. I'm picking him in this matchup, but I think the odds are probably right at minus 130 right now. John, anything here to add on what I think is the most exciting prelim on the card, or should we move on to the next matchup?
Just to reiterate what you said, we have seen improvements of Ziam. Like early on in the UFC, it looked like he was completely one-dimensional, and it was like, okay, we clearly want to fade this guy with wrestlers that are going to take him down and out-grapple him. And he's talked repeatedly that that's something that they're consistently working at throughout training camp, and we've actually seen the improvements in the fights, not just talk. So that's always encouraging when you see somebody who says they're working on something and then you actually see the improvements in the octagon. And I think we've seen that from him. Reverse Malarkey a couple times there. The takedown defense as well is definitely looking improved against the fence, especially, you mentioned the Don Madge fight where he literally just like got held against the fence for extended periods. Like, right. I don't see that happening anymore. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't change how I see the fight playing out. I'm just saying, like, in general, he's a guy that is making improvements. So if McKinney doesn't get that early finish, then I think he could be in trouble here.
Always something to know in terms of the improvements. For Ziam, only 24 years old, 8-month layoff prior to this fight. He's now had 2 training camps training for a Terence McKinney matchup. So takedown defense, I assume, is something, or I would hope is something he's worked on. And like you mentioned, we have seen improvements. I expect those to continue. Let's move on to the next fight here. We got Josanne Nunez. She's minus 210, $8.9 thousand coming off of a knockout win over Bia Malachi in her UFC debut, where, John, I believe you cashed like a plus 600, plus 550 ticket on Nunez KO in that spot. This weekend, she's back. She takes on UFC newcomer and also a short notice replacement here, and Ramonda Pascual, who comes back plus 175, 7.3K. I'll give the quick, scouting report on Pascual. I watched a couple of her fights. There's not a ton of tape available on her because a lot of her fights have been finished pretty quickly. She's 6-2. Her last fight was in Invicta. She has fought a really poor strength of schedule. And I mean, that's kind of par for the course when we talk about regional women's MMA these days, especially overseas. But I mean, Pascual, if you just go back and look at her record, it's really something. Like, of her 6 wins, 4 of the girls have 0 professional losses. One of them was 2-0 prior to the Invicta fight, her last time out. And then the girl that has the most wins that she's fought has 5 wins, but also 8 losses. So she really hasn't fought anybody. And Josanne Nunez, I wouldn't consider some great MMA prospect, but we know what she's going to go in there and do. She's super small. She's super small for the weight class. She's going to go in there, throw her overhand. She's at a height and reach disadvantage against almost everybody in the division. But she throws with power. Her striking is decent. I understand her being a favorite this weekend. My question is kind of, is minus 210 too far of a favorite for a girl like Josanne Nunez, who's like a very power punching, reliant, undersized girl at 135 pounds? I guess my answer is she probably covers minus 200. I just think that Pascual has really fought no one. Like, she's decent Muay Thai, but her grappling looks pretty poor. I think Nunez, better grappler, although we've seen Nunez kind of spend too much time on her back before as well. I don't know. My breakdown here is all over the place. I think it's just a tough fight to call. It's tough to know where Pascual is at. She's fought really nobody and hasn't even looked great against that level of competition. But yeah, I guess my question to you, John, is like, how live is Pascual as an underdog this weekend? I know we cashed on Nunez in the debut, but is minus 200 in this sort of stylistic matchup too far?
Yeah, I always get excited about my girl Josanne Nunez, the real Nunez champ. 460 was the knockout ticket last time out against Bea Malecki. Such a clear spot. This one isn't quite as clear, but I do think, she could definitely have some success against Pasquale. Pasquale is somebody who got into the game a little bit late, didn't start fighting professionally MMA until she was like 26 or something like that. I believe she's like 33 now. Right. But this is just like a classic spot. And I love the sloppy, low-level women's MMA fights where I think we probably see a finish. And I say that for a couple reasons. One, these fights are just never as owned as the male fights on DraftKings. They're just not. That's not like a sexist comment or anything like that. It's just fact. Like, they're never owned as much as the male fights because people just don't see, you don't see as many finishes on the female side, but also they're just generally not as popular. And so a fight like this with two low-level fighters that most people don't know much about, I have a lot of interest here because I think it's definitely a fight where I think both of them have finishing upside. I think both of them have glaring holes. Talking about my girl Josiane Nunez, you said she can spend a lot of time off her back, and that could be an issue here against Pasquale. Pasquale does have a little bit of a wrestling, base. She can come in here, land takedowns. I wouldn't be surprised. She'd have to watch out for, Nunez likes to play off her back a little bit. Pasquale not super, I don't really think she could stay completely safe in top position. I'll put it that way. But I also do think that she does have some tools. She has a little bit of power herself. But also, if she gets on top, I think she has finishing potential here. Now, I do lean with my girl Nunez. I think she's stronger. I think she hits harder. And even though Pasquale is going to have a clear size advantage, her last fight was at 150 pounds. And I know Nunez has fought at like 155 before, but let's be honest, she did not belong in that weight class. I do expect Pasquale to be the bigger fighter. But, we saw it in the Bea Malecki fight. Just because you're a taller fighter or have a reach advantage, it doesn't matter if you don't know how to use it. And I'm not sure that Pasquale really knows how to use that length to her advantage. I expect Nunez to close the distance. I expect her to land those heavy punches when she blitzes forward. But again, I do think that both of these women have finishing potential, and I think both of them have lapses defensively. So this is a fight that I'm actually really excited about. I haven't placed a bet on it. To answer your question, I would not play Nunez at the money line, but we're still going with my girl to get the job done here. I'll probably have more exposure to on DraftKings, but again, I'll have both sides of this matchup, and I'm excited for this one.
One thing I wanted to quickly mention before we move on here is that Pasquale should have a 5-inch height advantage in this matchup, but actually Josiane Nunez has a reach advantage in this spot, which kind of seems crazy. And Nunez is, of course, small for the division. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure what weight class this fight is going down at because UFC and Tapology listed at different weight classes. There's a chance it's at 145 pounds. I think it's at 135 for bantamweight, but there's certainly conflicting information out there about that. I will say Nunez has fought up at 145 before. Pasquale's last fight was actually at a catch weight of 150. But she has also fought as low as 135. So it's either at 135 or 145. Regardless, Nunez is not at this massive reach disadvantage. And I feel like, yeah, she's small, but even when I talk about her, I feel like I might be kind of overrating the height difference between herself and much of the division, and especially reach, because Bea Malecki is so long for the division. She had like almost a foot on Nunez. They look like they would belong in different weight classes. I think Malecki had like an 8-inch reach advantage, which is massive, obviously. Pasquale, not necessarily going to have that, and also not someone, like you mentioned, doesn't fight behind her length very well. Not that she has a ton of it, but she likes getting in the clinch situation. She has decent knees. So I think Nunez is going to get that fight in the pocket that she so wants. You know what I mean? I just think she's going to be able to get to those positions where she's able to get in range and spam the overhand, and she hits hard. And hopefully, one of the ladies gets finished, and we get to make some money on it on DraftKings. I'll have exposure to both sides on DK. I think you made a good point about that, John. These type of fights always go under owned, especially considering that we have an 11 fight slate. Sometimes when we get less fights on the card, people just want to jam in the best plays, right? Like everyone knows Islam's the best play on the slate. He's the biggest favorite, gets takedowns in bulk at 9.5K. He's a no-brainer in cash sort of contest. But everyone, with the less fighters there are in the player pool, the more condensed ownership can become on certain fighters. And sometimes fights like this get left down. It's like minus 200 to not have the judges' scorecard. So hopefully not too many people see that fact and just kind of focus on the fact that it's a lower level women's bout. one of those that usually sees the scorecards, but maybe won't this weekend. Move on to the next fight here. We got Ignacio Bahamandes. He's a -210 favorite here. 9K flat against Zhu Rong, who comes back +175, $7.2 thousand for Rong this weekend. Interesting matchup. Ignacio Bahamandes, a guy who had a significant amount of hype, I would say, coming off a contender series. Chilean kid, pretty good striker, extremely long for the weight class. Lost his UFC debut to Jon McDessie in a pretty competitive fight, and then had a highlight knockout his last time out over Roosevelt Roberts, who at one point had a lot of hype behind his name. And Bahamandes looked really good last time out. I bet against him was dead wrong. He landed like 110 significant strikes, highlight reel spinning wheel kick knockout in that matchup. I do think Zhu Rong is interesting this weekend. Generally, I think Bahamandes is pretty skilled for his age. I will say he's kind of a walking punching bag on the feet. He doesn't play a ton of defense, keeps his hands a little lower than I would like, but he's able to just move forward. One of those guys who has zombie-like durability, will hit you more than he'll take 5 to give 6 sort of deal, as opposed to take 1 to give 2. He's always susceptible to get into brawls, which makes it hard for him to be a -200, -250 level favorite if he's going to get into so many brawls. But I do think he has a good amount of technical skill. On the other hand, I don't think Zhu Rong is necessarily the best fighter on the roster. He's a guy who has a lot of holes in his game, but I have been encouraged throughout his first 2 UFC fights where he's 1-1. He's attempted 12 takedowns. He's landed 9 of them. Now, let's be clear. He's not fighting anyone with great takedown defense. Brennan Jenkins, one of the worst fighters on the roster, who Rong put out his last time out. And then he actually lost to Rodrigo Vargas his first time out, who's also not a high-quality fighter. He'll fight Paddy Pimblett in a few weeks. But Zhu Rong has fought a low level of competition, but I've been encouraged by the fact, at least for this matchup, that he shot 12 takedowns through his first 2 UFC fights. However, on the feet, man, he doesn't have a ton of volume. He's very, very likely to just get stuck staring at his opponent, and you can't do that against a guy like Bahamandes, who might outstrike him 2-1 or even 3-1 when they're on the feet. Zhu Rong just throws no type of volume whatsoever. He does carry a little bit of power. We've seen finishes on the regional scene from him in terms of the knockout power. Hasn't fought a great level of competition, but Bahamandes is really susceptible to getting hit cleanly. So I think Zhu Rong is a live underdog. Coming into the week, I was pretty sure I was going to play him at a +180 sort of number, but the more the week goes on, I think I might just wait. I think Bahamandes is fadeable against the right kind of guy who's going to push a real pace and try to take him down. And Zhu Rong, I think, has the right idea, no pun intended, but I'm not sure he's good enough to be able to execute that sort of game plan against a guy like Bahamandes, who's really tricky to figure out if you're not able to close the distance. So I'll pick Bahamandes this weekend as a -210 favorite. If I had to bet a side, I would still bet Zhu Rong at +175, but no longer a spot where I feel as strongly as I thought I would coming into the week. John, any action from you here on Rong versus Bahamandes?
No action for me. I would say if you think the underdog is live here, then Zhu Rong. No, not working. All right, just scratch that. We'll cut that out. It didn't work.
I got it.
It didn't work.
I mean, I thought my pun was like almost bad.
Yeah, you know me. I had to slip in a dad joke there. In my old age, it's getting to me. But yeah, no. I in all seriousness, I think Bahamandes is a clearly better striker than Zhu Rong here. And you mentioned Zhu Rong does at least have the wrestling upside that we would look to target Bahamandes with. Like, that's clearly going to be the way that you beat him, right? Super long, throws a ton of flashy leg kicks. He's a good striker outside of his defense, because like you said, he doesn't move his head. He's constantly putting out volume. He just doesn't play a ton of defense. He eats clean punches, even from super low level guys. Like the Contender Series fight, got tagged a couple times there. You mentioned the McDessie fight. It was like he just didn't move his head the entire time. So that's clearly a problem. I just don't think that Zhu Rong could take advantage of that. Like, I think maybe he can land a takedown or 2 here, but I think just being the taller fighter, working on improving his takedown defense, I think it's going to be a lot harder for Zhu Rong to get those takedowns than it was in his first 2 fights. So I think just the majority of this fight plays out on the feet. I think Bahamandes probably hurts him and probably knocks him out. If not, I think it's a pretty convincing decision on the Bahamandes side.
Yeah, important to note, Bahamandes 12 for 12 on his takedowns defended against Roosevelt Roberts. Roberts, not necessarily the best wrestler in the world, but encouraging still to defend takedowns for the entirety of a 15-minute sample and to do so pretty much flawlessly. So I agree with you. I do think that Bahamandes gets the job done. I'm not as convinced that he covers at -200 price tag as you seem to be, but sounds like we're both picking him and no action on the fight. Let's move on to the next fight, which should be pretty fun. I'm excited for this one. We got Gregory Rodriguez, currently RoboCop, -160, $8.5 thousand against UFC newcomer and Dana White Contender Series alum Armen Petrosyan, who comes into this fight plus 140 and a 7.7K price tag on DraftKings. John, I went first for the last fight. I know that you love breaking down these contender series guy. Armen Petrosyan, a guy who comes in with a kickboxing background, somebody who clearly has a lot of skill on the feet. Head kick knockout, really unloaded on his opponent towards the end of round 1 on the contender series, but not before he was taken down a few times. I'm curious where you think Petrosyan stands as a prospect. We know he's going to be a really good striker, but just how much of a liability is his grappling going to be coming into the UFC? And then obviously, is he a live underdog this weekend? A lot of people seem to think so. He's like plus 160 to start the week, down to plus 140 now. So market coming in a little bit on Armen Petrosyan in his UFC debut. You think it's warranted or no, John?
Yeah, I do. I'm on the Petrosyan side as well. I haven't backed him yet, but this is one, I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I'm waiting for a couple props to drop. I think the better way to target Petrosyan here is to target him by knockout, and that's what I plan to do. He's a plus 140 underdog. Maybe we see the knockout prop in the plus 300 range or so. I think that's certainly playable. I think that's clearly going to be the way he wins here. And you mentioned the defensive grappling being a bit of a concern, and it is against a guy like Gregory Rodriguez, who's looked pretty damn good throughout the UFC. Beat Dusko Todorovic. I stupidly did not back him at the money line. Felt really confident fading Dusko with him, but I bet Rodriguez by KO at plus 270, which did not get there. Dusko's chin held up for that fight. And then I think after that, he ended up getting knocked out. Was that, or maybe by Soriano? I don't know if I'm getting those fights reversed, but it was just one of those things where I'm like
Dusko got knocked out, I think before then.
Okay, so maybe I had it backwards. But either way, I thought that was a good read. It just didn't get there for me. And then in the Park fight, Rodriguez looked really good early, in out grappling Park, but the cardio, which that's kind of been a thing for him throughout his career, the cardio is not great. He has a black belt in BJJ, super big for the weight class, so we know he's strong, able to outmuscle these guys, but I don't know, man. I have some real concerns because if you look at Petrosyan, what he does, you mentioned the high-level striking background, former Russian Muay Thai champion. Like, the dude is a very legitimate striker. He's going to have a speed advantage while the fight plays out on the feet. Super quick kicks, fast hands, does have knockout power against a guy like Rodriguez, who we have seen knocked out before, who does have a suspect gas tank. And now this is like similar to the Petrosyan Contender Series fight to a much higher level because the guy he fought on Contenders was a complete bum and Rodriguez is not, but the game plan is the same. Yes, Petrosyan will give up takedowns, but what Petrosyan does really well and why I feel comfortable backing him, especially at an underdog price, is that he's constantly working back to his feet. Like, he's one of those people that are like, he's not going to accept position. He's consistently working back to his feet. And then he'll give up another takedown, and then he's going to get up again, and then he'll give up another takedown, and then he's going to get up again. And eventually, that's going to tire out his opponent to where, okay, now they're just going to have to strike with him. And that's where they're in trouble, in my opinion. And I think that's what's going to happen here. He just has to outlast that grappling storm from Rodriguez. I don't think Rodriguez has the cardio to just do a grapple heavy game plan for 15 minutes. It's just not going to happen, especially since, like, we've seen in previous Rodriguez fights where he's willing to strike. And I don't think he has the chin to go up against a high level striker with knockout power in this fight. So I like the Petrosyan side. I will be targeting him by knockout. I think he's for sure going to get taken down at least once here. It's just that I think Rodriguez probably needs to sub him early, or it's going to be an uphill battle because over time, at some point in this fight, Petrosyan's just going to keep working back to his feet, and the gas tank's just going to keep going down to Rodriguez, and that's where it's really going to start to sway in the favor of Petrosyan. So this is another spot where we mentioned the ZM fight. That might be a live betting spot opportunity. I think the same thing here with Petrosyan. Maybe he gives up a takedown or two, gets out grappled for the first round, but then I really think rounds 2 and round 3 favor the Petrosyan side. So I like Petrosyan. I like Petrosyan by knockout. I'll have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. Rodriguez has the early submission finishing upside, and Petrosyan has the knockout upside, whether it comes early or in the middle rounds or the last round. I think it happens. I like Petrosyan by knockout.
Sounds like a spot where we kind of see the fight playing out similarly, but we might end up on props on the opposite side. There was a fight like that last weekend, John, and I can't exactly remember which fight it was. Where we each kind of saw the fight playing out. Right, and I thought I picked Buckley by decision,
Yep.
and it got really sketchy towards the end. But you like the Razak Hassan KO early on in the fight. So good memory by you there. I think you did a good job kind of breaking down the stylistic matchup in this spot. I do think that Petrosian is a pretty solid striker at the UFC level. His get-up game is decent, as you mentioned, John. One big flaw, a red flag, if you will, that I've seen in kind of all of his tape. When he gets taken down, he gives his back almost every single time to get up. And Gregory Rodriguez, he's a decent striker. I think some people are kind of underrating his striking going to this matchup, but clearly he's going to need to land some takedowns in order to win this matchup against a striking specialist. And we've seen Rodriguez land takedowns before. I think that if Petrosian gives his back to a guy like Rodriguez, who's the best pure grappler he's faced, you mentioned he fought a bum on Contender Series, was able to get back to his feet and tire out his opponent. I totally agree with you. Rodriguez knocked out Park in his last matchup, but it looked like his gas tank was running on empty prior to the knockout. Like, it looked like it was in bad shape for Rodriguez. Pretty crazy fight in general, but I do think early, if Rodriguez gets him down and Petrosian gives his back, I expect Gregory Rodriguez to take it. John, you mentioned the Petrosian knockout, the way you're probably going to play this fight, plus 200. I think I prefer the RoboCop submission, actually, instead of knockout. I saw FanDuel open a plus 460 on that number. This is something that I've been trying to capitalize on recently in terms of the prop betting market, is betting guys to win by submission who historically have grappled in their UFC career, but might not necessarily have a submission in a long period of time. It worked out really well a few weeks ago with who fought on the main card of the pay-per-view, Kyler Phillips. Kyler Phillips fought on the pay-per-view. He had been wrestling a lot and getting in decent positions, but didn't have a submission inside the UFC. We got like a plus 550 sub number against Marcelo Rojo, who really struggles to defend takedowns. We cashed on that. Then last weekend, I came up short and really wasn't even that close with Parker Porter, who we had seen attempt like 11 takedowns through 2 UFC matchups. And we knew Alain Baudot was a poor grappler. So I just took the plus 800 on Porter's submission. Obviously, it didn't win. In this spot, we got like plus 500 for Rodriguez to win by submission. We've seen him shoot takedowns before. He's landed almost 3 takedowns per 15 in the UFC. If he gets the fight to the ground, I think he's going to get the back at some point. The one thing I'll say about Rodriguez is he's a good grappler, but not necessarily like the best finisher when he gets to decent positions. He does let guys off the hook a little bit, so that's a concern. But at plus 500, 460, whatever it is, I think I'm okay living with that risk. I think Rodriguez gets to a really good position early on in the ground in this fight, and we'll have a chance to end it. So I'll pick RoboCop. It sounds like we're on opposite sides here, John, but kind of a similar thought process as to how the fight plays out. And I think we see a finish from either side. Both guys make for really strong DK plays. I think we can certainly agree on that part of it. Let's move on to the next fight here. This is one that we've seen some interesting line movement throughout fight week. We got Arman Tsarukyan currently a minus 220 favorite after opening and kind of sticking around the minus 300 range for much of the time the lines have been out here. But Joel Alvarez has seen a lot of action throughout fight week. He's down to a plus 180 underdog here. He's $7.1 thousand on DK. And look, I've been wrong on Joel Alvarez before, as recently as his last fight. I think I bet against him his last 2 fights, actually. I bet Alexander Yakovlev, who got submitted from guard, and then I bet Thiago Moises, who basically got his ass kicked from minute 1 against Joel Alvarez. I've been wrong on Alvarez. He's 28 years old. He's massive for 155 pounds. In fact, he hardly ever makes weight, but has a lot of size if he's able to make weight, consistently stay at lightweight. Spams leg kicks, pretty decent with those. His grappling, at least in terms of the submissions, is pretty opportunistic. He gets taken down a lot, accepts guard, but is always throwing up triangles, armbar, stuff like that off of his back. And then with Arman Tsarukyan, this is a guy who a lot of people think potentially could be championship material. Fought Islam Makhachev, who main events this weekend in his UFC debut, and fought a way more competitive fight than people were thinking going into it. Has since ripped off 4 consecutive wins in relatively dominant fashion against a pretty good strength of schedule. He beat Davi Ramos, Matt Frivola, OAM, and then Christos Giagos, his last time out, was a knockout in the first round. So pretty high level matchup here. I can't get away from the fact that I think Alvarez is facing a guy who's going to take him down, and I don't think he's guard subbing a guy here in Arman Tsarukyan, who I rate his grappling much higher than I do Joel Alvarez's. So I think Tsarukyan's going to be able to get takedowns. The question is, how long does this fight stay on the feet? Because Joel Alvarez has shown the ability, at least early on in fights, to throw, 10 strikes per minute, like no joke. In the Thiago Moises fight from the opening bell, just ripping leg kicks, attacking his opponent. I tend to think that he cuts a ton of weight and will slow down in later rounds, but early on, certainly a dangerous guy on the feet. I guess the question is, just how dangerous is he this weekend? I'm tempted to bet Arman Tsarukyan in a minus 220 price tag now that it's coming all the way. If it got to minus 200, I would certainly lay that type of number, but let's be clear. I've been wrong betting against Joel Alvarez before. I'm a little nervous to go back to the well, John. I'm curious your opinion because you haven't honestly been as out on Alvarez as I have. I've been very outspoken that I thought, he gets taken down every fight. I don't like that he plays off his back. I don't think, playing guard jiu-jitsu is super sustainable at 155 pounds once you hit the top 15. But I've been wrong every time out. So I'm curious to hear your opinion, someone who's been a little bit higher and more correct, basically, on Joel Alvarez throughout his UFC career.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to styles make fights. The one that sticks out to me where we had a little disagreement is I think it was the Palatnikov fight or Yakovlev. One of those
Yakovlev fight, yeah.
Yakovlev, yeah. Where I backed him by submission there, but that one was like super clear. Like I just don't see that being like, if Sarukian, let me put it this way, if Sarukian gets on top, like Yakovlev, I can never say his name right, Yakovlev was in that fight, there is almost no way that Sarukian's getting submitted, in my opinion. And so a lot of what Alvarez win condition, like that's why I've liked him in other matchups where he has that type of finishing upside. It's just not going to work against somebody that's as skilled as Sarukian. I'm always going to back the guy, almost always going to back the guy who I think is going to spend significant time in top position as long as I know that he can stay safe. And I think he stays safe here. I don't have many concerns with him in this matchup. So yes, I have been, I don't know if I've been higher on the market than Alvarez. I've definitely given him a little bit more respect. There's some people that, think he's just a complete fluke submission off his back guy, because honestly, like you said, those are low probability outcomes. It's just that they've come against the lesser talented fighters in the division. The more he works his way up, I think the less we start seeing that. And that's where I have concerns for him, especially in this matchup against Sarukian, a guy that a lot of people have pegged as maybe a future contender, future champ, like you said, whatever. I don't know if I quite go that far, but I do think he is very impressive. And I think he has this tool set to stay safe here, to land takedowns, bank a ton of control time. And honestly, I'm not even that worried if he just doesn't spam takedowns early. Like, I know Alvarez is going to be super big, and that's the thing with people backing Alvarez. It's like, oh, well, he's so massive for the weight class. And yes, the striking did look much improved his last couple times out, but I just don't think it's going to look that great against Sarukian. Sarukian's super well-rounded. I don't think he has... Something just like... got in my throat there. I don't think he has to land takedowns. I think he will, but I'm not like, it's not one of those things like with Derek Brunson where it's like, or even the Jim Miller fight where I'm like, why isn't he looking for takedowns here? Like, I'm not going to be doing that with Sarukian, if that makes sense. Like, I think Sarukian can win the fight wherever it goes. Obviously, I want him to take the path of least resistance, spend time in top position. I think he will, but I don't think it's a must. But yeah, so I'm actually closer with you. I think, minus 200 range, I think you probably lay it with Sarukian.
Yeah, and shout out to Jim Miller, by the way. I don't like to talk about, previous cards when we come on the show, but Jim Miller came through in a big way for the boys last week, so it'll always be a lot of respect for Jim Miller, who we thought would have to shoot takedowns, and it turns out he's just going to whoop the newcomer on the feet anyway, so no big deal. But in this matchup, I agree, Arman Tsarukyan, he's one of those guys who possesses the threat of a takedown that I think makes his striking so much better, and there aren't a ton of guys in the UFC who have that skill. You could be a great wrestler, and that doesn't improve your striking. Like, I think of guys like Gregory Gillespie, who is a great wrestler, but I don't really think that's helped his striking throughout his UFC career. But guys like Arman Tsarukyan, even Makhachev in the main event, who I don't think in a kickboxing setting would be very good, but you add in the threat of a takedown, and their kickboxing in an MMA level becomes pretty fucking strong. Like, Arman Tsarukyan has not been getting outstruck at distance in the UFC. He's not a guy who needs takedowns. I think for Vola at distance, it was like 40-10 in distance strikes. Davi Ramos, OAM, he outstruck pretty much everyone at distance. And I know those aren't like guys like Joel Alvarez who are going to throw that amount of volume and be that big and that dangerous, but I don't think Arman necessarily needs to spam takedowns from the opening bell. I will also pick him to win this matchup. I think I'm going to bet him. I think I'll just lay the chalk at minus 220. And if I'm wrong, I'll just have to accept that the priors on Joel Alvarez are all out of whack and the guy's just out to get me. And it is what it is in that regard. I saw someone mention in the chat, Cotham said, shout out to Jim Miller, but he also said that we project some high ownership for Alvarez this weekend on DraftKings as an underdog. He's just 7.1K. We know his finishing ability because he has multiple finishes inside the UFC. In fact, the guy, since he lost his UFC debut, is 4-0 with 4 finishes. I do think he'll get a lot of upside on or a lot of ownership, I should say, on DK because of that potential upside. I'm happy to fade that, man, because especially even if he loses this weekend, and sometimes when we have 11 fights on the slate, you could have a guy who loses or a girl who loses end up being in the optimal lineup. Just if the fight, plays out where there's a ton of scoring on both sides, no underdogs win because of the salary cap. Sometimes a fighter who loses will make the optimal lineup. Joel Alvarez loses his fight this weekend. He's spending a lot of time on his back, and that is like the one spot in MMA where you don't score fantasy points. You look at sports like baseball, like football, you need to catch every 10 minutes or a touchdown or a home run to score fantasy points. And MMA, you basically have to exist to score fantasy points. I had a great lineup the other week that had Roxy Modafferi, who got blown out, but she landed like 80 significant strikes in a fight that just turned into two punching bags fighting each other, and Roxy scoring 66 got me there. I don't think there's any sort of situation where Joel Alvarez loses this weekend and is in lineups that are going to be able to, even put up a decent score, much less bink. So I'm happy to fade the high Alvarez ownership. Glad we got into that talk a little bit. We got 3 fights left, John. We got Jin Young Kim. She's minus 165, 8.6K against Priscilla Casuaeta, who comes back plus 140, 7.6K for cash. And I'll go quick here. First of all,
hang on. Sorry to cut you off. I just didn't want to get into this breakdown. Yeah, because I wanted to say something about that comment that Kunith brought up, but also shout out to you. I forgot to say, the man just binks last week's tournament, the 3 max $200 entry, just binks it, doesn't say a word. I have my buddy, I'm at my buddy's watching the fights, and my buddy Brett, shout out to Brett if he's watching, he tells me, he's like, yo, Jonah took down a tournament, and I was like, what? I had no idea. And then I go look, I was in the contest too. Of course, I was like DFL. I didn't have a good week at all. But I look and I'm like, son of a bitch, he took it down. So yeah, shout out to you. That's awesome. 7,500 at first. So great takedown there. And I checked out the lineup too, super sharp lineup. So shout out to you, credit to you. Just wanted to shout you out a little bit, but also in reference to that comment that you mentioned, like these are the slates, like he said, Alvarez is going to be popular, right? He's going to be probably one of the most popular underdogs on the slate. With only 11 fights, I consistently talk about these shorter slates. You really need to focus on ways to get unique. So if we already know that Alvarez is going to be one of the most popular underdogs, it's either you think he has the potential to be that slate breaking, like if you really think about it, he has to, you have to really think that he's going to win at his projected ownership, whatever you think that will be. Like you have to really believe in Alvarez to really play him at all this week. I would take the reverse approach. If he's going to be the most expensive underdog, I might not have any Alvarez this week. And I know that's risky in a sense because it's like if he wins, then, obviously I'm screwed, I'm done, whatever. But I would actually go heavier on Circunail because Circunail has a ton of upside. If people are going to back Alvarez more, then that's just going to give us, people are obviously still going to play the Circunail side, but it's going to give us an ownership discount on Circunail because it's just less amount of lineups that are going to have him because of Alvarez's popularity. So I'm probably going to take a pretty risky approach and definitely underweight, but I'm considering just like Xing him out because again, it's a shorter slate. You have to find ways to get unique. I think just fading probably the most popular underdog on the slate is one way to do that. So I just wanted to say that and shout you out for winning last week. Hopefully we can stay hot for the boys and bring the good momentum for this week as well.
Absolutely appreciate the shout out. I'm one of those sick fucks where it's like I play the 5-5-5 every week, and like I've been in position to win with Giga Chikadze and Marvin Vittori one time as massive favorites for like 50K, and they were both like minus 250 and blew it. So last week was nice. Obviously not 50K, but we'll take the wins where we could get them these days. Been running porn main events. Like that you mentioned that, and also like there's no bigger leverage than MMA DFS. Like when we're playing NFL DFS, if you want to fade wide receiver one who's super going to be super high owned one weekend. I can't even think of an example off the top of my head. Like if you're fading, one of the Tyreek Hills of the world is projects to be super chalk. So you play the leverage of Travis Kelce instead. It's possible that like Mecole Hardman ends up going off, or Pringle, whoever it is on the Chiefs goes off. And MMA DFS, fighters are like completely inverse. If one does poorly, then their opponent does well. That's just how it works out in terms of the win bonus. So if you're underweight on Alvarez, I would for sure get overweight on Arman so you can, because he's going to be underowned just due to the sheer amount of ownership on Alvarez in general. So I love that you brought that point up, John. In terms of the next fight that I kind of started introducing, the Kim versus Casuaeta fight, easy pass for me here. Kim is a punching bag on the feet, but at least she throws a lot of volume. Casuaeta, I was going to say punching bag, but I don't want to use the same, term to describe both of them. Casuaeta is someone who we think of as somebody who really struggles in the grappling, right? And she has knockout power, like the Mazzani fight where she got taken down a bunch and then came back to get a KO. Jillian Robertson, her last time out, she had success. Casuaeta did in their stand-up early and then kind of got drowned immediately when it went to the grappling. But even in pure kickboxing fights, like she gets outstruck every single fight. Yeah, she has some knockout power. I don't know. I think these women are going to end up hitting each other a lot. I think Kim is the rightful favorite as someone who just lands more damage. And I don't think Kim's a very good grappler in her own right, but it's hard to be worse than Priscilla Casueta at the UFC level. So I'll pick Kim this weekend. I have really no strong opinions about the fight. Any perspective, total DFS. I really don't know what to do here, John. I'm sure you're not that excited to talk about the fight, but
Whoa.
do you have any opinion? Or pump the brakes. What's your opinion here on the featured battle on the main card?
I mean, Casuaeta has cashed some big tickets for me in the past. I do have, depending on the number, I do have some interest in potentially a Casuaeta by knockout prop if we see a big enough number. I would probably want like a plus 500 because Kim is pretty durable. If it's plus 500 or higher, I will have a play on it
at FanDuel right now.
Oh, so FanDuel did release
it?
Okay,
yeah.
so
at least in Colorado. I don't know.
All right, not as great as I was expecting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would have to rethink that one. I think that's probably closer at least to where I would have it because Kim is super durable, but she's also a legit punching bag. And I know you said that about Casuaeta and Kim as well, but Kim is like she's lost 3 of her last 4 fights on the basis of she doesn't know how to use her range, which is a big red flag. I consistently say like those fighters that are long for the division and have such a long reach advantage but can't use it and consistently get backed up and close distance by short fighters like Molly McCann who are out striking you, like that's a pretty big red flag. And she got beat up in her last fight pretty bad. She's got beat up before pretty bad. Like she eats a lot of clean punches, and Casuaeta does have the power, I think, to knock her out. And Casuaeta is also somebody who we know has a bunch of holes defensively, grappling, taken down a bunch of times, whatever. Kim has never attempted a takedown, or she's never landed a takedown in the UFC. She's never even attempted a submission in the UFC. So the grappling is off the table. So now Casuaeta at least has somebody that's going to give her the style of fight that she wants. So I think she could look okay here, landing the bigger shots against Kim, who doesn't move her head off the center line. I think Kim could land a lot of shots on Casuaeta as well. She keeps up a decent pace, decent volume as well. But Kim, it's like, even in her wins, it's like these sketchy split decisions. Like I really don't think she's that good. And it's not that I think Casuaeta is very talented, but she at least has the power. And that's what I always go back to in these lower level women's MMA fights is like, I'm almost always going to take the fighter who's more powerful and more aggressive if I think they both kind of aren't very good. I'm just going to lean towards that one. And in this case, she's at least the plus money side. So, like I said, I'd have a little bit of interest on Casuaeta by knockout, but I did expect it to be a little bit bigger of a number just based on the durability of Kim. I don't think she's ever been knocked out in her career, and we've seen her eat a lot of clean shots. She does get beat up, her face gets swollen, but she hasn't. She keeps pushing forward and she keeps going. So it's not like I could say she's susceptible to getting hurt. It's just that I think Casuaeta at least has the power to do it. But yeah, that's kind of my take here. I'd lean towards the underdog. I won't have any Kim exposure on DraftKings.
If you're really bored and really want to gamble on Saturday, I think you could do worse than plus 450 on the fight to end by split decision over on DK Sportsbook right now. Not something I'm ever going to bet, but I don't know. I think you could do worse. If you really want to be a full DJ income Saturday night, I know we haven't given away, at least me, a ton of plays for this weekend. That's where I think you get action on this fight. Fun little, not a long shot necessarily, but something with nice plus money odds and something fun to root for. The split decision sweat is, if you haven't sweated before, I hit like Benson Henderson to win by split like 22-1 in Bellator a few weeks ago. Just a massive sweat when you wait for that third scorecard to come in. But let's talk about the co-main here. We got Misha Circunail minus 120, $8,300 against Wellington Terman, who comes back even money dog, 7.9K. Interesting matchup, John. I was actually really excited to bet Wellington Terman in his last matchup that was then canceled when he was supposed to fight Rodolfo Vieira in that fight. I thought he would have a cardio advantage, a striking advantage. However, I'm kind of tempted to bet the other side here and bet against him against Misha Cirkunov in this matchup. It's an interesting matchup because Misha Cirkunov is a guy who I think is relatively skilled, and we all agree on that for the division. A pretty good grappler, has the ability to submit pretty much anybody in the division when he's able to get in good positions, but he's so damn fragile. We've seen him knocked out plenty of times at the UFC level. His last matchup against Krzysztof Jotko, where he just kind of faded real bad down the stretch, which did not inspire a lot of confidence. And Wellington Turman is a tough guy to take down. He's never been taken down in the UFC, although he hasn't fought a ton of wrestlers for a ton of time inside of the cage, but he's someone who's tough to take down. He's not a great striker. Kind of see this fight playing out as a little bit of a shit show. I think Cirkunov is way more talented. I want to bet him at a short price, like -120. But it's hard, man. He's 34 years old. He's been knocked out so many times. His cardio didn't look good in his last matchup. Turman just doesn't inspire a ton of confidence. As excited as I was to back him his last time out, that was more a fate of his opponent. And here, I lean Cirkunov. I think he deserves to be a bigger favorite. I might bet him on the money line. I don't know. I'm curious. John, what are your thoughts here on Cirkunov versus Turman? Because I think that Cirkunov is a better striker and a better grappler than Turman, and Turman doesn't possess a ton of that knockout threat that it makes us so scared to back Misha Cirkunov in general. But I don't know. He's just a tough name to click and put money on these days. I'm curious your thoughts on the fight here, John.
Yeah, I'm not tempted at all to bet Cirkunov. I'm not tempted at all to bet Turman either. Like you mentioned, I could just see this being a really sloppy fight where both guys honestly are very untrustworthy. I think I agree with you in that Cirkunov is more skilled in multiple areas, but at the same time, I don't even know if he's he might be more fragile too. He's been knocked out
Way
4
more
times
fragile
in his career. I know Turman doesn't necessarily, he's not a killer striker or anything, but his striking's not awful. I do think he could hurt Cirkunov. And on the flip side, I think Cirkunov could hurt him. Both of these guys have been brutally knocked out before. I don't think either of them like getting hit. And I honestly, I think either guy could, in the right scenario, I think either guy could win by submission as well. So it's a fight where I think both guys are untrustworthy, where I think either guy finishing wouldn't surprise me. So I'm just going to sit on the sidelines and watch this one. I'm going to get my exposure on DraftKings because I think we probably see a finish here. It's one of those weird fights where it's everything points to a finish, and then watch we just get one of those decisions. It just makes no sense. But yeah, no, I'm unlike you, I'm not really tempted at all to bet this fight. I am going to get a decent amount of it on DraftKings just because I think both guys are just kind of fragile and susceptible to getting hurt. But I don't really have a strong take either way. So on paper, I think a lot of things point to Cirkunov, but I think there's also a lot, potentially even more red flags on the Cirkunov side. With his age, he's been hurt more times than Turman. Turman's younger, potentially more athletic, at least at this age. It's just one of those things where it's the fighter's getting older. Durability's been shot already. I know Turman, again, the durability's shot for him too. So it's everything that I say is a red flag for Cirkunov, you look at the other side and you're well, Turman has those red flags too. So it's just a fight that I'm going to sit back and watch.
Right. And we also have Cirkunov moving down. He fought at 205 for a while. He's back down at 185 now and looked pretty bad his last time out. Maybe it is just best to pass. And honestly, when we talk about the durability, it makes me think of an under. You mentioned you'd kind of be surprised if it went to a decision. Early on in the week, I was considering an over 1.5 just because I think the pace of the fight is going to be pretty slow. And that's usually how I bet totals. If there's going to be a lot of significant strikes thrown, we have more chances for a finish. But this is one of those fights where it could be 5 strikes thrown per minute by either guy. And we just see someone randomly get knocked out or someone gets tapped immediately when we go to the ground. So highly volatile spot. I like Misha Cirkunov this weekend. I don't think I'm going to get there on a bet at -120. Just too many red flags. Best to stay away from him. I'll lean that way on DraftKings, though, that's for sure, at 8.3K with both guys. So almost evenly priced in this matchup. Now we can move on to the main event, John. We got Islam Makhachev, massive favorite, -900. He's $9.5 thousand on DraftKings. By far the most expensive fighter on the slate in terms of DK. And then we got the king, short notice, Bobby Green. Favorite fighter. He's coming in as a +600 dog, taking the fight on 10 days notice, 6.7K. I wish I had my Bobby Green shirt here. I just ordered it. I'm a little bit of a fanboy. I love Bobby Green. I'm really glad that he's getting the spotlight in the main event spot. Was kind of highlighted by the opening fight on the pay-per-view his last couple of times out. So really excited and happy for Bobby Green getting this opportunity. That said, he's certainly up against it here with Islam Makhachev, a man who I've come on this podcast many times for a long time and said I would make a favorite over literally anyone at 155 pounds. I just think he's that good. But the betting market seems to agree. Massive price, minus 900. John, I know you have a bet on the fight. You've got a little bit of trust here in Bobby Green. I saw it go in earlier on the week. You placed it on the money line for Bobby Green. I won't bury the hatchet. I'll let you go. Give me your breakdown here for the main event between Islam and Bobby Green.
Yeah, it's not really necessarily like any sort of hot take that I firmly believe Bobby Green will win. It's more of just like a respect thing. Like, why is Bobby Green, I played him at plus 540. I think you could even get a better line now if you shop around. I just wasn't sure if that line was going to stick around on FanDuel or not. I don't think you can make him, this massive of an underdog, where I understand Makhachev. It's no secret that like he's one of the best guys in the division. His grappling is next level. He's going to land takedowns. That smothering Dagestan wrestling, like he's very good. There's no denying that. But it's kind of one of those things, and we talked about it a little bit in the Israel Adesanya fight when we broke that fight down, is like, I don't think he's invincible. And we've seen him hurt before, years ago, even in the UFC. We saw him hurt by in the Martin fight, got knocked out there. Like, I think Bobby Green at plus 540 has a chance to make something crazy happen on Saturday. Obviously, the most likely outcome is Makhachev lands takedowns, smothers him, maybe submits him, but Bobby Green hasn't been submitted since 2009 or something. Like, he's a pretty good defensive grappler. He stays safe for the most part. I do think he could give up takedowns, but I think Bobby could also work back to his feet. And on the feet, I think he has a clear striking advantage. We saw him put on the boxing clinic against Nasrat Haqparast. I think it's going to be even more of a blowout if the fight plays out for extended periods on the feet against Makhachev. But the thing is I just don't know how long that's going to happen here. So I kept it to a 1-unit play just out of a respect for Bobby the King, because he should not be this big of a favorite, this big of an underdog against Makhachev, considering the striking advantage that he will have. It's just a fact of, I don't know how long he'll be able to keep it on the feet in order to realize that striking advantage. So it's one of those things. I think I wrote in my breakdown, my head says Makhachev grinds on him, wins a decision, maybe submits him later, but my heart says Bobby's the king. He's getting it done for the boys on Saturday. Let's go.
Man, I certainly hope so. I'm a massive Bobby Green fan. I will say I have not bet Bobby on the money line. I'm not sure I'm going to. Originally I thought how could someone be minus 1,000 versus the king, Bobby Green? But the more I think about it, Bobby Green has great get-ups, and his wrestling is pretty decent, offensively and defensively, underrated in general. I think the fight's going to be a little closer standing than you seem to think, John. You seem to think it'll be a blowout in terms of Bobby. Makhachev is one of those guys where the takedown kind of, I think, accentuates his striking a little bit. His takedown threat makes his striking much better. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think Bobby's going to be able to just throw jabs, 5-6 times, pump it in a row the way he loves to do, just because there's so much of a threat of stuff coming back at him. So I worry about that a little bit. Obviously, I'm not parlaying Makhachev. I'm not playing him on the money line straight, anything like that. I did play the over 1.5 rounds at minus 165. It's still there in most spots. I think that's good for a unit and a half. John mentioned Bobby hasn't been submitted since I think it's 2009. He's only been finished 4 times in his career as a pro. He's just a guy who historically goes to a lot of decisions. I think 15 of his 18 fights have gone over 1.5 in the UFC. And honestly, Islam, I don't think he's like this, force that is like Habib-like. I don't think he's quite that good. I think he's the most talented guy in the weight class, deserves to be a favorite over everyone. But we have seen him put in spots before, the Arman fight where he was slowing down a little bit. Like, I think Bobby's going to make him work a little bit in this spot. I think there's probably value on green money line. I'm not sure I'll bet it. Personally, I'll probably have some money down. I won't be around to watch the card this weekend. I'm going to a basketball game. I'm sure I'll be a little bit intoxicated and put some money on Bobby Green just for fun, but not sure I can give out the play officially, but I will play the over 1.5 rounds. Just Bobby's a tough guy to get out of there, man. I think Islam is a guy who might go, position over submission a little bit early on in the fight, and Bobby will maybe get a get up or two early on. So my take on the fight is that Islam probably wins. I hope Bobby wins the fight. My main point here, the thing I struggle with Bobby Green, because I bet Dan Hooker against Islam Makhachev, who's also one of my other favorite fighters. But Dan Hooker possesses a lot of finishing ability. He has the knee up the middle. I think Bobby, it's hard to win a minute against Islam Makhachev, much less a round. And Bobby doesn't have a ton of finishing upside, which is what's making it tough for me to pull the trigger specifically in this matchup. Is like, I think to beat Islam, most guys are going to have to knock him out. You know what I mean? I love Bobby Green. It's hard to be a massive favorite against the guy, but he doesn't possess a ton of knockout power. I know he knocked out Ally Quinta 2 fights ago, but he's more of a volume guy, and Islam is just not going to stand at range getting punched in the face 150 times over the course of 25 minutes. At least I don't think he is. I would love it to be surprised. I would love to be proven wrong there. So I'll pick Islam Makhachev. The bet is over 1.5 rounds at -165 for a unit and a half. I also think over 2.5s around even money are good for a unit or so. So I like the over. John's taking the shot on Bobby Green. I'm sure I'll join him in some capacity come Saturday night. That's the main event breakdown. John, if you have anything to add about the main event or any of the other 11 fights we talked about for this weekend at UFC Vegas 49, feel free to do so. And if not, take us out of here, my man.
Yeah, nothing to add except for if the king gets it done, we might one of us or maybe both of us on camera may have to do the Bobby Green intro roll into the octagon, the somersault flip.
I got some
pumping up the crowd. We might have to get some of that going for the boys. But yeah, I mean, this was a fun breakdown. Not the best card, guys. But again, I do think there's a couple spots that we could take advantage of. And it'll be a fun little slate on Saturday. Early start time on Saturday, which I prefer in my old age, as you know. But that's it, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please do me a favor. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on iTunes, please leave us a 5-star review. It is greatly appreciated. I'm John Kelly. That's Jonah Shiffman. This is the Undisputed Show presented by the FTN Network, saying goodbye and good luck, and we will see